All right. So welcome to this All Around Defenders show. Hey, Justin, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. This
Are you in
van
the
is
booth?
comfortable.
This series, is nonstop. We can broadcast from anywhere in the world, and as Justin is showing right now. Awesome. We love this.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we?
This isn't my first rodeo. I feel like this is like my fourth in a van.
I feel like you're challenging me right now. So next time I should be doing this from. Let's see.
Well, I did
Riding
it
a
from the
bike?
hospital for I think 2 of my kids now when they were getting born. They weren't actively being born. It was that moment where it's weird for the dad to be there, but yeah, whatever.
But this is the nature of a blue teamer, right? Let's face it. This is the nature of a blue teamer. We just do what we need to do. It doesn't matter when, right, or where from. And if you've been working on the print nightmare over the weekend or any of these ransomware attacks, we're with you. So don't worry. We feel the pain as well. but we're here to help. So feel free to share any comments you have on this topic that we're going to be discussing today, or anything else that you want Justin and I to cover while we're live here. But thanks for coming back. And today we're going to talk about limited budget. And I was just telling Justin a few minutes ago that I have this friend that he calls me every year, and he always asks me this question. He actually manages a huge budget, but we're going to talk about that as well. Like, do you always need a huge budget, or do you always have to spend money? But he asked me this question. It's like, hey, Ismael, what's the latest thing that I need to buy this year? My answer, what my answer is? My answer is, tell me, what's the problem you're trying to fix this year? So maybe we should start with that, right? If you have a budget, do you have to spend it all? Sometimes you do. But is it just about the money?
Do you actually, or is that a communication error? Because I hear the story of, well, I have X amount of dollars. If I don't spend it this year, the next year my budget will be less. But what if you were to say, this year I'm intentionally going to not spend all of it, but the next year I'm going to need this much? Because, for example, like when companies switch like CISOs, certain directors or VPs, there's usually that period of 3 months that kind of the budget's pause because they're doing a strategy call. Where are we at? What talent do our people have? Before they just blatantly keep following the budget. Like, they're like, nope, new leadership, we're changing how we spend our money. And some companies are starting to adopt, and I think this year I've heard more of this than ever. And I personally, I think it's a good thing, where they do spending 1 year, no spending year 2. Spending 1 year, it's 1 year on and 1 year off, where the second year they can't buy new products, like unless they have a really good justification.
When you say spending, you mean like spending on products, right? Not stop spending on people, I guess, or training.
Correct. Yeah, no. So like people and training, like, and that's there's OpEx and CapEx and however we want to budget, but like, this year I heard about Zero Trust, so I'm going to go buy a Zero Trust network. I'm going to get rid of all of our VPNs, and well, that's a more modern approach. But do you actually need like ZTNA or anything like that? Like, or did you just introduce something because you heard it was cool and shiny? And I think Blue Team, that's a huge struggle for me, because I end up having to come in as a contractor and fixing environments where people buy stuff, but they didn't define the problem up front. And they wasted time, they wasted labor. Maybe it's not even implemented correctly. And in some cases, it's actually got to get ripped out because it's causing more harm than good. So
it's also the hidden costs, right, of all of that. I mean, for every product, you're going to need like people to take care of them, and of course, you have to keep up, right, with the technology. Now, you mentioned something interesting, and I think we could probably do this experiment. What if we ask the audience, what is the problem you're trying to fix right now? And then maybe Justin and I, we can come up with some creative solutions that may involve more or less budget. Right? I'm looking at the comments, and I see you guys like adding comments there. So thank you so much for that. What is the problem you're trying to fix right now? If I ask you that question, is it, of course, Zero Trust is in the top of the agenda for everybody. And if you're working in in the US in a government agency, you know you have to work with that.
Building a SOC on a budget.
Look at that. Thank you, Andres. I like we like that one.
API security. Okay, we're getting some good ones in here.
Log analytics. Wow, Justin, that's your favorite topic right there. API security. Okay. Very nice. So what do we start with? SOC in a budget?
Yes, SOC. I mean, that's a good one, but it's also still define the SOC.
I was going to say, right? We need to define SOC. Well, to me, the main thing for a SOC, the main reason for a SOC to exist is monitoring, right? And then around that, you can have a lot of other things, and the response, but monitoring is the key piece. And if you've ever heard us like talking about this, I think this is not going to surprise you. But one of my favorite tools ever is Zeek. But I think that you could come up with a limited budget. You could come up with a good solution to run Zeek and Suricata, right? Both engines on a Raspberry Pi or on a low-cost PC. For example, we have done some sessions in the past on doing enterprise-grade labs at home, and I think I showed my rack where I have a couple of Intel NUCs, like cheap PCs, small form factor PCs that you can have on. You can easily buy off Amazon if you want, and put those sensors in there, right? And that will give you visibility across multiple network zones in your organization.
So right there, kind of pivoting off that and talking about the SOC, I think it's kind of interesting because like those Raspberry Pis that Ismael's talking about, you might say, well, that's a home lab. How does that compare to like an actual implementation? And it's oddly extremely close. I mean, it's really just the hardware you're throwing at it to do like a 10 gig, 100 gigs style network, but the implementation stays the same. So you can practice, but the same thing you're doing at home then applies to a large enterprise. But to me, I like that from like a budget discussion, because building a SOC to me is actually kind of a phased approach. Initially, it's you're spending money and training to try to gain visibility. But then once you gain visibility, okay, now it's time for me to implement analytics, because just having the data doesn't do, like Zeek Suricata, that's great. We got it up in place, but now what do I do with the data? But you have to have the data before you can even get to that part. And
right.
Your budget should kind of follow suit, because initially it's the hardware acquisition, but then it moves over into operations. And Ismael, Zeek and Suricata, is that like a set it and forget it thing?
No, that's no, absolutely not. It requires a lot of love and a lot of care. But again, you have to be specific. We have discussed this in the past, like threat modeling. Just pick something, right? For example, you want to build a SOC. What for? To monitor. What do you want to monitor? Okay. And it's like all the threats. No, I'm sorry, you cannot do that. All the assets. No, I'm sorry, you cannot do that. So prioritize. For example, you want to monitor for specific red teaming tools being used in your environment. If you want a recommendation, try to get good at identifying the weapons that attackers are using all the time. So start with these two, Cobalt Strike and Bloodhound. I tell you, I see these two in most of the breaches that we see on a regular basis. So if you're spending all your cycles patching or trying to patch Print Nightmare or anything related to that, that's great. But you know what? There's something that's going to be consistent across all of these attacks. One of those tools is Cobalt Strike. So just, now you have something specific to look for. And now look at how Zeek or Suricata can help you to detect the beacons that you would see in Cobalt Strike. But that is something you can achieve in a small.
But you've got a very targeted, here's the goal, and you get the data, figure out how to use that data to find the attack. And that kind of spitballs into where we've got from Andres, for a small team SOC, should we allocate everything for the SOAR, or should we put it more towards the SIM? And to me, it's, for one thing, SOAR and SIM are starting to blur a little bit. But get the data, validate you have the visibility to catch the attacks like the Cobalt Strike he's talking about. And then from there, now the next step again is case management. I've seen where a lot of companies start straight with the analytics or with the case management. That doesn't work because then you're missing the visibility. So again, to me, it's a phased approach. If you feel you don't have good visibility and detection, you're not ready for the SOAR. I'm not saying don't buy it. I love SOAR. But you got to get the first steps in first. So maybe this year for budget is more the SIM to get, can you actually even see stuff? Because what good is it for you to get it with automation and enrichment if there's really nothing to automate and enrich anyway?
Yeah.
And those integrations like SOAR, I love, but you also have the staff to know what integrations to turn on. And if you're trusting the vendor, I don't know, Ismael's pretty shady over there.
Well, what I would say is, try to define the capabilities that you're looking for, right? So that's what I meant with what's the problem that you have. Problem not like, hey, something is not working. Problem like, what are you trying to achieve? Yeah. And okay, you want to mitigate risk. You want to defend against ransomware. What are the capabilities that you need? I don't really care about acronyms, SIM, SOAR. As Justin is saying, you're going to find that probably what vendor A defines as SOAR or SIM maybe doesn't work for you.
Yep.
You need something else. So figure out what's the capabilities that you're looking for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Because even like take the term playbook. In information security, I've seen the term playbook applied to so many different concepts that if someone starts talking about playbooks, I have no clue what you're talking about. You have to define that. So yeah.
Threat intelligence.
Yeah.
Harris is saying threat intelligence. That's another favorite subject. Since we're talking about budget, you want to develop the best threat intelligence on a budget? Do this. Deploy early warning sensors around your environment. Some people used to call them honeypots, but that's not the real name. They're called early warning sensors. And you want to deploy them around the network in tactical places, along with honey tokens. That's something we discussed in 530 as well. Just a simple honey token. Now, what do you know attackers are always going to do? Once they land on a system, they're going to try to achieve the privilege escalation, right? To get credentials on that system, escalate privilege, and then pivot, move laterally. Well, there are some open source projects that you can use to, if you don't have the means of doing this with your endpoint, vendor, to have some decoys in memory in the form of tokens or hashes. So when an attacker grabs it, it gives you a tactical detection of that. So in general, I'm a big fan of anything that helps you to generate your own contextual threat intelligence. That's always the best threat intelligence.
Well, it forces you to understand your environment, and then if someone looks in a direction they shouldn't, you catch them. So that exercise, bringing this back to kind of the budget, that example you're talking about, for one thing, is actually extremely low cost. And when it comes to honeypots, honey tokens, canaries, I personally lean more towards, even on a large scale organization, the open source implementations. But there are other technologies, like say a next gen firewall, that even from the small to the large, I don't want open source unless it's a lab. But
yes.
Honey tokens, I really think that's one solution. There are commercial vendors, but the exercise of understanding what the tokens are and how to implement them overall helps you solve that problem even better. If you're trying to do, how am I being attacked? How are they moving on my environment? I don't know. You see that EDR, there is technically open source EDR, but I just don't know if I would actually be that interested in it.
So here's the problem with anything like that. These solutions are going to be as good as, the not just the capabilities and the engineering behind it, but you also need the content, right? And as any vendor knows, you need a lot of investment to maintain good quality content behind these products. And we're talking about detection content, right? And if you want to do the test, just download Snort or Suricata with the default rules and try to detect things. Yeah, good luck with that, right? How much love, how much care will you have to put into maintaining, good quality content for these detections? Well, that's what vendors do, and there's no substitution to that. However, there are some good complements to these solutions. And for example, when it comes to doing searches, real-time searches, if you have an EDR, you're typically going to have a good engine to do real-time searches and queries on your environment. If you don't have anything like that, well, OS query could be a good first step to get there, And in some cases, it can, talking about budget, what I like about these open source solutions is that you can, open source or free, is that you can use them to justify the need for budget for that category. I've done this myself for many, many years. For example, Justin, when I started to deploy network security monitoring sensors back in, oh man, I'm gonna reveal my age now, I guess. I'm getting old. Like almost 15 years ago? Yeah, 15 years ago. And I didn't have budget for it. So this is what I did. I picked up like hardware that was just like legacy. Nobody wanted it. In the data center, in the office I was working with, and I said, hey, can I pick this up and connect it to the networks? I'm just going to span a port. I'm going to run a POC. This is what the POC is about. It's not going to cost us anything, okay? I'm going to put open source software in here, and I'm going to try to get some dashboards that can give us this information. Like, for example, what are the protocols that we use in our network, right? How much data is going out? Things like that. Okay, it's not going to cost you any money. So yeah, Ismael, you can play with this. So I installed, at the time, Snort, and I installed Bro and a bunch of other solutions. And Squeal, right? You love Squeal, Justin, don't you? TCLTK for the win. Anyways, so it would take me hours to build these sensors, but I put it there, and on a monthly basis, I would put together a small report, pretty reports, pie charts, and graphics, because that's what management loves. And I would put these reports together. I present it to the management, and I would say, hey, this is what I'm seeing this month. And by the way, we detected these threats, and we're able to respond to them. So every month I would do that for some time. And then one month I was not able to put together a report. So what happened was that the CISO came back to me and said, hey, Ismael, what is this? We like those reports. Oh, you like them? Well, too bad, because it was running on a legacy box. A system was so old, and it just died. So we don't have any hardware for this. Okay, so what will you need if we wanted to run this across all of our data centers and across all of our locations, so we can have that data coming from all of our network? What will we need? Oh, you know what? Coincidentally, I have this quote here. I had everything prepared, right? And it was true. Like, the machine just died. It couldn't keep up with all the traffic. But now I had prepared, this is the budget that we need. I tell you, I guarantee that if I had gone like up front and said, hey, boss, this is all the money I need to spend, all the many hundreds of thousands of dollars in hardware and software and all of that to have this visibility, I would have never gotten it. Why? Because they didn't understand the need for it. So that's one thing I would recommend you. Find ways to create a need for that.
And speak to the language that the business understands.
Exactly.
Like, very similar. I had an organization that at the time, it was when PCAP was getting big, and still kind of Snort and stuff like that. But I wanted to get PCAP so I could do forensics, incident handling, all of that. But the business did not understand, what's this value of this thing called Wireshark, and that just seems dumb. And it's like, well, if I had PCAP, all those operational errors where our main application keeps hanging or breaking. What if I told you that I could actually figure out from the packets what's going on, whether it's the server, the workstation? In fact, I could even tell you, like, it's resource utilization on the server. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you can tell based on the weights and let me prove it. And so we did that. We had one location that just constantly would hang up. You'd have like 50 employees who can't work. Next day it happened again. We had the packet capture running. It's like, oh, there it is. So just think, if I added, because they had hypervisors at each of these locations, if I added 8 gig of RAM to each of these servers, and maybe like a hard drive, and it could even be an external hard drive, I don't care. Then all of a sudden I could deploy PCAP, and in this case we also got Zeek and Suricata similarly. And they're like, okay, this is going to cost us how much? And every time this type of issue would have happened, it would have cost us this much because we had 50 people not working, loss of revenue here. And they're like, they did the math. We sat down together and like, I want this done in 2 months across 1,200 locations. I was like, okay, as long as I'm not going on site. And so they sent technicians everywhere because they did the math. We did it together. And it's like, security for a win, but everybody's winning off of this. And even when you talk about like EDR and other things like that, that should be some of the conversations you're having. Like a SIM, I'm in the SIM space all the time. Number one exercise I do, even during a proof of concept, is let's just look at your logs. And I'm not even looking for security things. I'm just, what stands out? Oh, look, here's a driver error. Oh, is this box been blue screening? Yeah, it's this right here. Wait, what? Oh, data's right there. So I think when security gets greedy and they forget that there's a business and they report to the business and they don't exist without the business, getting budget approved and projects approved, or really identifying the problem in the first place, if all you think about is security, you're not going to identify the problem correctly, because risks are tied to the business, not the security department. And so if you start to, change the verbiage you're using, we need next gen firewall, we need CASB, we want to do API security because, well, if this were to happen, like do just even like the standard risk factors. If one attack happened, they stole all this data, this application contains this many records, of which these are unique. Therefore, according to the Ponemon Institute, it would cost us this much dollars. The API security products we're assessing currently cost this. Plus, it helps us do better coding practices and, identify where some of the APIs are broken operationally. And there's some value you can get out of that.
With ransomware attacks now, it's easier than ever to put dollars into these mitigations, right? The numbers are out there. So that's a language that every CFO will speak, right? And every chief financial officer out there is concerned with the bottom line of any organization, which is the financial, the numbers, right? And ransomware is something that affects operations and affects revenue directly. So
for ransomware, Ismael, how would you spend some money? Would you spend money? Like if that's the problem, like maybe you're seeing all your neighbors go up in flames and you realize that you might be in the gun site. What are some of the projects you might want to consider the budget on?
I think, when I look at most of these ransomware attacks, we have to start realizing that they're not advanced at all, that these people are using like standard tools that we can use ourselves and that we can become familiar with. And that most of these intrusions like actually take some time to find them. Whether it's the initial vector, it's not even like a phishing attack, right? We've been talking about phishing for so long, but we keep coming back to the basics, like applications that are insecure, that are published, facing the internet. So something as simple as, are you guys scanning yourselves from the outside? Do you know what you're exposing? Because if you're exposing RDP, right, you're exposing applications that have SQL injection vulnerabilities. You're exposing JBoss consoles with administrator consoles like open up to the world. You're low-hanging fruit. And at least what you don't want to be is the low-hanging fruit, right? So that's the first thing I will start looking at. What's my attack surface? And then, as I said before, focus on what are pretty much every other attacker using these days. Looking at Cobalt Strike beacons. There are plenty of ways to identify like Cobalt Strike servers. It's just one scanner away. So talking about budget, I'm gonna pick this. A good network scanner. It's probably one of the most effective security tools ever, and it still is, right? I'm sorry, it's not fancy, it's not maybe shiny, but making use of a good scanner and knowing what you're looking for it's useful. It's
Yeah,
a very first step.
I want to pull the audience and see if I can get some help from them on this one too, because I see so much of this where ransomware is the thing we're trying to prevent. So company goes out and buys ransomware prevention, often some type of endpoint software, EDR, like maybe it's dedicated ransomware prevention. Now, because nobody wants to say that's their company, can anybody who either firsthand or knows somebody who bought ransomware mitigation software but still got ransomed, just put a comment.
I'll tell you more, Justin. I see companies that they have the protection, and everybody knows this. Okay, so there's no protection in security at all.
But
Just let's get past it.
Yep.
Right? You have some degree of prevention, and as I always say, prevention buys you time. Okay, it's like the front door. Somebody's going to bring it down, given enough time. What is that time for you? That's what you need to think about. There's no protection. There's no full-time protection. Protection only buys you time. I see a lot of organizations that they have those protections in place. At some point, they're evaded. They also have detection in place and EDR products in place that are sending alarms and saying, hey, you have something here, and nobody's doing anything about it for weeks.
Yep.
For weeks.
And so, like I think one of my favorite discussions in 530 that we have is like, rather than trying to perfectly solve the problem, because ransomware in my book is just another flavor of malware. Like, instead of trying to saying malware can never drop, why don't we talk about how we can architect things so that if it does drop, the harm is limited? And no, I'm not just talking backups for ransomware, but like segmentation should no longer just be network segmentation. And even if it is, it better have access controls or it's not network segmentation. But like logon segmentation. Why is it that once you're in the environment, your identity can be used to access just about anything? And single sign-on is convenient, but man, that is damaging as all get out. And yet we don't re-architect. Like, I remember talking to one company. I was like, hey, wait. You have 12,000 employees. 4,000 of them, 1/3 of your employees can access every single patient record in the entire organization at once. Like, select all from table, all of it. And you don't have a problem with that. Like, they can just do that. Like, there's no checks and balance. It's just nurses, doctors, insurance providers. Like, everybody can just do it. It's like, you realize if that data gets breached or ransomed, the cost of that would be this much. You really need to be implementing like a bank teller approach. You know, I can pull out $500, no problem. But if I say 50 grand, they need a manager's approval. Doesn't mean no. We're not saying no. We're just saying higher risk, therefore extra steps. And the zero trust concepts, that's a lot of this. It's not saying you can never be trusted. It's just saying there might need to be extra steps to match the level of risk. And a lot of our products can do that sort of thing. It's just you're not architecting it. We're not implementing those things. We're single sign-oning everything instead.
Right. And the thing is, you already have technology looking at your Active Directory to do that, right? All you need is second accounts, jump boxes. You can use host-based firewalls to implement some of the micro-segmentation that zero trust, claims. And it's like, oh, that's another buzzword, like micro-segmentation. Yeah, it's just like putting a firewall as close to the data you're trying to protect as possible. That's what it is. And guess what? We've had host-based firewalls for such a long time, right? So that is something that you can do. The other thing you can do as well, and I was thinking about how to reduce the number of alerts, right, that take a long time to investigate, is divide and conquer. That's one of the most powerful things you can do. Realize you cannot protect everything. Realize that you can look at everything in the same way. So the problem that I see with many organizations is that, and Justin, you can talk about SIEM for a while, right? If you bring all the alerts into a SIEM, now you have 10,000 alerts a day. And you have the potentially unwanted application, potentially unwanted whatever. And then buried within 10,000 alerts that are really non-critical, you have one alert that says Cobalt Strike Beacon. Which one do you think is the one you should be looking at? I guarantee if you have 10,000 alerts a day, you're not going to look at that one. And that's the one you want to look at.
Well, and in my mind, and this is one of my number one frustrations with SIEM, and it's actually one of the number one reasons I think SIMs are being used improperly, it's not a SIM issue, it's the application, is if you have more alerts than you can investigate, something's wrong. You either need less alerts or you need to start doing some automation. This is where SOAR comes in and looks really good, but the implementations I see as SOAR are often black eyes too, because identify the problem. Like if you have 10,000 poor quality alerts, but sometimes they might find something that matters, what I'm hearing is your SIM, your SOAR, whatever you're doing, needs to do some of the automatic steps that you're doing manually. And a SIM can do that, and a SOAR can do that, and there's a lot of platforms that can do that. Like if I get an alert that someone went to a potentially bad domain, because how many alerts do you get on just a DNS name? It might have, should have, could have been bad. Oops. Well, what would you manually do to validate if it was actually good or not? Do you send it to a malware detonation site to blow up and actually access it? Do you check it with feeds? Do you look at the process that made the DNS request? Well, I don't have that currently. Go get it. That's my thing. Like, you have a problem. It's very specific. That 10,000 plus, I've seen companies that generate 2 million alerts in a 5-minute period. Okay, that's too much. So then we start putting forms of, one, a process to find alerts that are just junk, get rid of them. And then the ones that maybe just need tuned a little bit, like your vulnerability scanner, that's going to trigger a whole bunch of alarms just naturally. I don't care. So go through, do some reduction. But then the alerts, like data from a SIM should not be what I call raw. Like raw means you just brought the data in and you have the fields and you're searching fields. Make the data auto-correlated with other data or add context to it. That's enrichment. It's not a magical thing, but the results are magical. But so we just act like it doesn't exist.
What you're saying is that there's no product that you can just bring and say, oh, I'm going to buy product A that I'm going to put on my network and everything's going to be awesome. I will get all these analytics and all these magic detections that will tell me everything that's going on. What you're saying is, first of all, you need to have the right mindset, right? Thinking on prevention exclusively, it's not definitely the right mindset to be good at this game, to keep up with the attacks. And that requires people, it requires, training, because I've seen this throughout my entire career and over 20 years doing security. This is not something that is just like comes naturally for many of us. It's something that you have to be trained on, something you have to experience, something you have to live, right?
Even if it came naturally to us, you'd still have to build up enough experience to even know. Like you can't just magically know this stuff. And like the comment here about some tools need manually investigated. I firmly believe that tools are not going to replace people. Tools should automate things that people don't need to do because people decided the computer can do it for me. Like SOAR out of the box is kind of worthless until a person comes up and says, well, given our investigation workflows, it'd be helpful if it did these things. In truth, if I had it my way, and I'll never get it this way, I would rather spend the same amount of money that you currently spend on SIM and SOAR on my people. And then just with whatever budget's left, figure it out. Because those people, they'd be using PowerShell remoting and other tools and not even have a SIM, and they could catch more than we do. And so automation, I believe that.
I'm going to also give you the other side of it, which is true, right? I mean, automation is super important. It's basic. But the problem with automation is you need to know what to do. So the SOAR is not going to tell you this is the response you need to do. Once again, if you see a Cobalt Strike beacon, what do you do? Isolate, quarantine the machine. I know it. Hold on a second. Do you know how many other beacons do you have around on your network that you haven't detected yet? Do you know what type of reaction can that trigger? Could you make the problem a bad day even worse by choosing the wrong reaction? I'll tell you what, you can. You can, because the adversary is watching you. So SOAR is just a means to an end. Do you know what's your strategy? Do you know what to do?
And if you're buying automation, but you're asking the vendor what needs automated, in my book, you're not ready to buy automation. And I know that's a tough pill to swallow, but you should know what needs automated, not them.
Exactly. Yeah. So once again, it comes back to what is the problem you're trying to solve. And if you didn't think you had problems, maybe you know you have a few more problems right now.
Ismael, we've had multiple comments about cyber insurance, so we probably should talk that. Should a portion of the budget be dedicated towards cybersecurity insurance policies? What's your take on that?
I'll be honest. I don't think that's I don't think that's a completely financial discussion, a business discussion. It's like, do you pay the ransom or not? If you ask me, no, you don't pay the ransom. But it's not going to be your call, right? It's going to be the CFO's call and the CEO's call.
I actually feel like that question in many instances on social media especially is kind of arrogant. Not the insurance one, but do you pay the ransom? Because you don't know the business, you don't know what happens if you don't pay it. And like I'm firmly like we shouldn't give terrorists money. But
of course not.
If the equivalent is like in healthcare, people die. So is it better for them to die because you can't provide healthcare, or because terrorists are killing people? And it's not a black and white question. It's not binary. It's like that's a hard question.
I always say security is not binary. Security is analog, right? There is no 100% protection, and there is no zero trust. Okay, there is less trust you can do, and there's more security that you can apply. So I totally agree. I think cyber insurance it's something that I can tell you based on my conversations with some insurance companies, and not lately. This was some time ago. They did not have a good understanding of the whole industry. So I think, and I'm aligned to one of the comments here, the way cyber insurance was done before, it may not be the way that it's going to be in the near future. But at the end of the day, let's face it, it's all a business for insurance companies as well. So it's a business for the ransom guys, and it's a business for them. So are they winning? Are they getting more money than they're losing? It all comes down to that. If they get more money than they're losing.
I think my struggle with cyber insurance is like my company, we do consulting in SIM and MSSP. We have insurance. And I could say it's cyber insurance, but when you say cyber insurance, you probably don't mean what I have. What you're probably talking about is cyber insurance around breaches. And I agree with Ismael that it's a business decision, but I also feel like I'm a little bit negative and pessimistic, because I've seen insurance companies with some of my clients say, well, you were attacked, that's an act of war type thing, therefore we don't want to pay it. And what is covered versus what isn't covered. And I mean, health insurance is more of like, you might get sick. Like I'm here at a hospital right now. My wife's getting a scan. That's something that in a perfect world, or statistically, she shouldn't have needed, but she did. So insurance covers it, hopefully. Now, with cybersecurity, though, it really is more of an if. Statistically, it's gonna happen. With insurance, to me, it's not a proven, it's not like cryptography, right? It's been out for a while. It's proven. We know that it holds the test of time. With cyber insurance, depending on who you went with and the circumstances, it may or may not work. I mean, what's the one with the gift card company that they were in litigation, and they might still be in litigation? It's been like 4 or 5 years.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah. And like, how do you, it goes back to one of the lives that we did before, right? How do you measure how secure you are? And this is the same challenge that every insurance company has. I mean, you can define controls and say, okay, if you do have endpoint, detection and response, you have network detection and response, you have analytics, you have a SOC or an MDR service. I see, Andres was talking about that. Do you consider an MDR a budget-friendly approach? Well, I don't know if it's budget-friendly or not, but I would say it might be a good investment if you cannot do these things, to have somebody giving you that first line of response. However, I would be careful with thinking, oh, I'm good because I have an MDR service. They can do what they can do. They don't know your business. They don't know what's critical. They don't know what is normal.
And they typically don't want to, because that's not an economy of scale. As an MSSP personally, that's something that I'm trying to be the opposite of. I'm trying to make each client where we treat them as a unique snowflake and learn their environments. But I also know that's hard, that's challenging. That does not scale. So now all of a sudden I need more staff to maintain that. And so what we see is many MSSPs, MDRs, you're going to get the bare minimum things that work across everybody, but they don't tend to go much farther. And as a business, I'm going to tell you that it's a bad choice on my part, because I would make more money if I didn't do that. Because that's the truth of the equation. You do it in-house, it's because it's your business. If you do it as a company, your business model is to make money. You know, I don't know if does anybody know some nonprofit large-scale MSSPs? Anybody?
No,
I'm not aware of
I
any.
don't.
That should tell you why. It's because they would probably do a better job. Like if there were, I'd say pick them over me. So, yeah.
And there's also, yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but there's also a thought of, well, if everybody goes to some MSSPs or some MDRs, will the war be less asymmetric? Because it's very asymmetric now, right? A threat actor going against a small organization that they don't have the budget to do anything like this. Well, by having MDRs and MSSPs, now you could limit some of that exposure. But you're also creating additional single points of failure, as we have seen in recent events with supply chain attacks.
Yep.
I am a big proponent of, you need to have some in-house capabilities. Nobody knows their business better than you do. And stop thinking about threat intelligence, or you should, yeah. Stop thinking about threat intelligence as something you buy, okay? I would say threat intelligence is something that you develop. It's particular to your business. It's your understanding of what can go wrong and what do I need to do. That's the strategic threat intelligence you want to develop. And you may need to complement that with other sources, but think about what that means to your business.
But in one way, there's one way I've seen where you can throw money at that problem you just talked about, though. But it's not where you're buying it as a product. It's almost like for example, if I were to say, like, there's a question about threat hunting. And let's say your company doesn't threat hunt at all today. Like, you've got some tools, but you don't really know, like, what could I use my existing tools for threat hunting? Do I need to buy more? You could throw money at it and say, hey, I need an expert to come in. I need them to assess how to do threat hunting, start to implement it. And it's almost as if you're paying them as a staff augmentation temporarily. They work with you for however many months, and then they take that knowledge and they train someone on-prem to take that over. And I say on-prem, that doesn't mean you're a cloud customer or not. It doesn't matter. But there is use cases where that is highly effective. You bring someone in who already knows what they're doing. They implement and help put in processes, and then they train the company to take it over. But they help you define that problem and help you solve it, and then just transfer that. Now, if they leave and you didn't actually do the transfer properly, or you didn't have the headcount to actually keep it up, don't even start going down that road, because you just wasted money. But I've seen that work time and time again.
All right. So how about we wrap it up? Some final comments? I would say, again, I think one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself is that, right? What is that? What's the next thing you need to do to move the needle in the right direction? Or what is the problem you're trying to fix? And then think specific, divide and conquer, right? Thinking about dealing with ransomware is such a big problem. Break it into smaller chunks. Like, what is the data that you cannot live without? And what are some of the things that are repeating across most of these ransomware attack chains? What are some of the common vectors? And start looking at your attack exposure. At least, I don't want to be the low-hanging fruit, right? So look at your applications out there, RDP, any credentials that could be exposed. There are easy ways to look for those, right? And I was thinking sometimes even like VirusTotal, you'll be surprised how many credentials you find in VirusTotal. Have I been pound, right? Free API that you can use. What do you think, Justin? See your...
Yeah, I think everything with the budget goes back to what's the problem you're solving. Like, too many times I've been sitting down in group meetings and, okay, you have 1 million, you have 2 million, you have 20 million, let's allocate it. But you really should have started with the problem before you started allocating it. Well, that's okay. We get a budget, we have to spend it. Okay, well, let's sit down as a group and talk about all the problems and then start linking it to the budget, whether it's OPEX or CAPEX. Because if we say ransomware, that's a threat. Well, what's the goal? Is the goal preventing it? Well, there's some things we can do to help with that. Is it to stop it from spreading? Well, I wish more organizations would be spending their money on things like identity management, maybe some of the more modern ways to do proxies or the VPN replacements, which also are linked to identity. But some of that might be implementing things like, how do I tell that a user's being normal versus starting to deviate? Baseline monitoring. And can I react to that? And I don't know. I don't necessarily want that to be 100% automated. Some pieces, yes, but there are commercial solutions that do really good with those. But again, all of that has to link back to a problem. And you're just sitting in a room kind of doing a tabletop discussion of what are the 20 different ways we could try to help address this problem. Okay, which of these makes sense and fits our budget then? And it's kind of a backwards approach to allocating the money. I feel like that's a more better approach. And sometimes you do need to say, maybe we shouldn't be buying a product because, like, do you own a car? Like, many of you own a car. Okay, guess what? You have to do oil changes. You have to fill it with gas. Like, there's maintenance. And even, like, I am not a mechanic, so I have to drive it over to an auto shop every time something needs repaired. I don't change my own oil. I could probably figure it out, but I don't do it. And so there's upkeep. You have a house, you pay real estate taxes. You rent, well, you still have to interface with the landlord, and everything has upkeep.
But Justin, my car has AI. Your car doesn't have AI? Come on.
No.
Yeah,
it has a radio. No.
You have to look at the cost of ownership, right? Like, all of that is part of the cost of ownership. It's not just like having the solution. And sometimes the best way of looking at this is when you have a larger organization, you need to have commercial solutions, right, to manage things at scale. But sometimes you can look at open source solutions and free ones to complement that percentage of things that you're not going to get covered by a vendor. And that's why having the right mindset and the right focus, it's very important in my opinion.
Yep.
To make the best use of the money, right?
When I do the budget discussions, we try to factor in open source in there too, because some places, in my opinion, personally, open source might make more sense for certain pieces. But again, then there's others that I won't even consider it, that it needs to be a commercial product. But then when I'm budgeting dollars at the same time, every year when I do this for my company, we have 2 budgets. Technically 3 if you do OPEX, CAPEX, but I just treat that as one budget. And then we have a human hour budget. And we actually cross-correlate the 2 because they directly relate to each other. And if they don't tie, then you end up buying something like, what? Why, when we said this would take 2 months to implement, why is it taking 4? Well, you didn't factor in the human side of that item. And so we like to cross-chain them, which is in some aspects project management, but it's part of the factor.
So what are we going to be talking next? I see, there's more people talking about zero trust. I think we talked about zero trust, but in the meantime, we've seen a lot of documents being released from the government, right? The U.S. government talking about guidelines and use cases, and it's funny. Like when Justin and I looked at the documents, like, wow, this is exactly what we discussed in Security 530, right? Discover and assess and microsegmentation, microsegmentation, and all of these different things, applications, data classification and DLP, SIEM and SOAR. It's a big part of zero trust. So we're thinking of, maybe the next live, what we do is we pick up a couple of use cases. Like, hey, this is the attacker. Without zero trust, most likely in your organization today, this is what the attacker can do. And this is what you should be able to do with Zero Trust. But now I think the most interesting piece is like, how did you get to do that? That's what I think most of these documents are missing. They tell you what you should be doing, but not necessarily how you do that.
Right.
Like, how does a WAF fit into that? How does a Sysbone fit into that, or an EDR, or so let's talk about that, right? I think that would be a good discussion.
Yep, practical approaches with stuff you likely already can use, plus maybe some newer ways of doing it as well.
Yay!
Yeah.
Awesome. All righty. Well, thank you guys for joining us today, and feel free to continue the conversation on Twitter, right? @SecurityMapper and @AboutSecurity. We'll be happy to connect with you there, and see you in the next one.
And next time, I'll aim for the plane.
Drive safely. Drive safely.
See ya.